Welcome to the Kubus podcast. In each episode, we will be meeting the individuals who can give us real insight into the problems, solutions, and people in our technology industry.
Hi all, and thanks for tuning into our latest Kubus podcast. I am Matt Korsak here with my colleague Edward Smith. We are both new business managers here at Kubus. Today we are joined by a good friend of ours we know from days of old, Ben Turnbull from Pentera.
Hi there, Ben. So, thanks for joining us. If you could start by telling us a little bit about yourself, your role, and maybe let's dive into a little bit about Pentera.
No problem at all. My name is Ben Turnbull, as you've both just done, and we do know each other from a few years back. My job is the channel sales manager for Pentera for the UK and Kubus are, I think, our most newly joined partner to the partner ecosystem in the UK, and excited to be here today to do this podcast with you. Yeah. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean at Kubus we've been bringing on a lot of new different security vendors, and Pentera was pretty much top of our list of who we wanted to start working with. So could you give us a little bit of a background of what you guys do at Pentera?
Pentera, where do I start? It's a unique, a disruptive, a different proposition than our competition out there in the market. We are automated security validation, and I know you guys know what that means, but the listeners, for the listeners' benefits, what does that mean? So if you just break it down to the three words, basically, right? It's automation. Automation isn't new. It's been around for a long, long time. Over 100 years, in fact, since I think it was Henry Ford with the Model T first started using automation in ANCs to help humans, right? We're not here to replace humans. We're here to help. By using automation, you get everything that automation gives you, which is scalability, reliability, accuracy, speed, and consistency. You get all of those things using Pentera. And then if you move on to the word security, so everybody's got lots of defensive security controls in their layers and layers of defensive security controls in their environments, right from next generation firewalls to switches to routers to web application firewalls to CASB to SOC to SIEM to EDRs to MDRs. Everybody's got these layers of defensive cybersecurity controls. We would label them as reactive security. We're more of a proactive security approach. And then the validation part, so completing the automated security validation or ASV thing, the validation part is what we help to do is using that automation, we validate that those security controls that I've just talked about, that companies have all got, actually do the job that you pay them to do. So we're essentially using automation, using software, stress testing your entirety of your defensive control system at scale using automation to make sure that those layers of security that you've got in play do actually work and they do the job that they advertise that they do for you.
Oh, fantastic. So what you're telling us is that you're testing the security controls, validating that they work in the way that they say they do. And then, they don't necessarily have to, let's say, prove them to not work. They could be such things as like a configuration issue, if that's fair to say.
It could be anything, right? I mean, the thing with all of these security products that you've got in play from a defensive point of view is that they're all operated by humans, right? Humans are prone to error. We all are. I know I am. No one's perfect, right? And when anything's operated by a human, you're prone to make mistakes. So we're there to, like to your point, Ed, to look at misconfigurations, to look at gaps that you might have in your security, to look at your security in general and see if you're getting the best bang for your buck. Do the security controls that you've got in place today, the security controls that you've had in place for years, and the security investments that you want to make in the future, are they actually doing the job that you need them to do? And that could be, as to your point of, if there is a misconfig, how do you know that? Do you test it often? What Pentera does is using automation, we can test at scale and speed and allow you to quickly put fixes in place for those misconfigurations. So if you've got agents for your EDRs across thousands of endpoints, for example, one of those endpoints could be switched off at some point, either by the user or it could be switched off by someone in your security team to install some software on a server, to install some software on a laptop, on a desktop, on an endpoint in general. But how do you know it's been switched back on again? It's human error, right? If something's not switched back on again, it's not doing the job that you paid it to do, or it's not doing the job you want it to do. So we stress test that and make sure that you've got no holes in and no gaps in your security controls to make sure that you're ultimately protected.
I think you touched on an interesting point as well, and appreciate obviously we're familiar with the technology, so some of these may come across almost like loaded questions, but you said most often these controls are all defensive and there's nothing really on the offensive side or testing them. I guess the closest thing people would kind of familiarize that to would be something like a penetration test. But how often are people doing these penetration tests, and how long do they take? And once you start making changes afterwards, how do you know that the changes you're making aren't causing more issues down the line, I assume?
Indeed, yeah. So we're not here, first and foremost, we're not here to replace penetration testing as such. The human element of penetration testing is something that will last forever, right? Much as I was saying about humans earlier, humans have got different specializations, they've got different techniques and procedures that they use on a day-to-day basis. So penetration testing, as it is and will always be, is here to stay. What we do is allow those people to specialize in the areas that they specialize in, whether that's application testing, whether it's web app testing, whether it's testing door cards, whether it's whatever it is. Penetration testing goes deep and far and wide. But the reality is that if you're only penetration testing a certain area or a small subset of your network, and just assuming that the rest of your business is the same as those that you're testing, and you're only doing that once a year, once every 6 months, you may do it a little bit more regularly than that, depending on what industry you're in and whether you're regulated or legislated to do so. The fact is, it's just not often enough. Changes are made to a business's environment, to their infrastructure, to servers. There's new software installed all the time. There's changes, there's tweaks, there's patches that are done to software all the time. That doing it once a year, once every 6 months, or even once every 3 months just isn't fit for purpose anymore. You need something in play that would stress test it often, and the ability to do that with automation and do that using software is what we do. We don't replace it as such, but we complement it essentially.
You've hit on a good point there. So you're actually stress testing an environment. So a lot of the customers that I've spoke to in the past, when they're talking about stress testing their environment, or at least seeing where they're vulnerable, they're using things like vulnerability scanners or breach and attack simulators. And I know a little bit about why you guys are different, but it'd be good to hear from the horse's mouth, as it were, what Pentera does in comparison to those sorts of breeds of technology.
I think I'll touch on vulnerability scanners first, because I would have said that in 99% of the customers that we've got globally, that we sit alongside a vulnerability scanner, of which there are many, right? Vulnerability scanners been around a long time. But critically, what vulnerability scanners don't tell you is whether the vulnerability that you've got in your environment is exploitable. They will match a CVSS score to a CVE that's been released by another vendor. There's multiple CVEs that are released almost daily, and they will score in your environment if you've got that vulnerability, if you've potentially got that vulnerability in your environment, and score it rated 10 to 1 on a CVSS score. But they don't tell you if it's exploitable in your own unique production environment, in your own unique environment as a customer. What a vulnerability scanner doesn't tell you is what an attacker or hacker could potentially do if they exploited that vulnerability. And it could be that they label it as a 9.8, 9.9, or even a 10. And you've got these people and security teams rushing around to patch things. But it might not actually be a critical vulnerability to you. It might be that server, for example, that you have to update or to patch, could be hidden behind a web application firewall, or could be protected in some way that an attacker or a hacker couldn't exploit that vulnerability. What Pentera does is almost completely switch that on its head, and we'll look at it at a completely different angle. Because we're only looking for the exploitability. We're looking for the most critical risk that you've got in your business today. And that might not be a 10 or a 9 or an 8 on a vulnerability scan. It could be a culmination of way down in the depths and the weeds of that vulnerability scan. You've got the 1.2s, the 2.7s and the 3.9s, for example, that interdependently aren't actually a risk to you as a business. But the way an attacker or a hacker moves within within a business, they could loop those together in a perfect storm of those critical vulnerabilities, matching them all together. They could access the username and password of your domain controller, at which point they've got hold of you as a business. That is way more important to you as a business if you allow someone to get access to that rather than a Windows server that's hidden behind a security control that does work, right?
Oh, definitely, yeah. And I guess, I assume there are some things that don't even class as a vulnerability on the scale either. There are things that you wouldn't even flag up at all as a vulnerability that would still be important to kind of look at and make sure those gaps are kind of being plugged.
Indeed, yeah. It's all, for Pentera, it's all about the exploitability. It's all about, can we, acting or emulating the attacker or a hacker's perspective as a proactive security vendor within, again, the customer's own unique production environment. Everybody's different, right? Everybody's got their own different production environments. Can we exploit that vulnerability? Can we act and emulate the exact same way an attacker or a hacker would act if they were in your business, and find an exploitable vulnerability that allows us to further the attack, so to say, which is more critical to you than as I said before, than a vulnerability scan that's just showing you what's out there in the wild, and it's saying this could be in your environment, but they don't know your own unique environment from an exploitability point of view like we do. And then you mentioned, Ed, about the breach and attack simulation comparison. There's two reasons really why we're different. We're being classed more and more in that field now. It's an area, I think, of the cyber industry that's starting to move from what was maybe perceived before as a nice to have to a need to have, the ability to stress test security controls. But the way that we're different is twofold really. One is in the wording, breach and attack simulation. We validate, we don't simulate. We don't assume or imply that there could or that this could or might happen in your environment. We validate that it will. In the way that we work within an environment, it's, we're looking for the exploitability, again, emulating the hacker's perspective. We go right to the point of exploiting said vulnerability, not just simulating that it might or could happen in your environment. And the other major difference is that they require an agent to be installed on the endpoints that they want to simulate the attack on. Pentera is completely agentless by design. Right from the start of when Pentera was built, it was built with agentless technology in mind. And the reason for that really is hackers don't deploy agents. If a hacker gets into your business, they don't deploy an agent, they get found really quickly, right? So with us emulating that perspective, agentless was the way forward from day one.
So you're providing the hacker's perspective, you're validating, you're not simulating, and you're stress testing the security controls. Mm-hmm. But one thing I think our viewers will probably ask the question of is, it's a safety concern. So if you're stress testing an environment and you're not simulating an attack and giving the hacker's perspective, how do they know, how their organisation won't accidentally get knocked over?
Mm-hmm. I can comfortably say that in all of the POVs that we run, all of the production environments that our 850 plus customers run Pentera in, we've never had an issue, first and foremost. We've got a data sheet that you guys obviously have got access to that's all around safety by design. And the reason that we can be so confident in that is that we've got 120 plus strong research and development team, Pentera Labs team, who essentially build the attacks that we use within Pentera as a software product from the ground up. They're built in they look at the tools, techniques and procedures that attackers and hackers are using out there in the wild, and then they break that right down and then rebuild it from scratch in a completely safe by design manner. So we can emulate what they're doing, but we do it without the bad stuff happening, essentially. I've heard one of my colleagues refer to us as the tiger with no teeth or claws. We'll prowl around the network and we'll prowl around the infrastructure of a customer, but we won't do that bad bit in terms of sinking the teeth in and getting the claws out and mauling you, essentially. So you can be comfortable and completely happy in the fact that we'll emulate the attacker, we just won't do that nasty last bit and exfiltrate data. We won't do that nasty last bit and drop a ransomware payload into your environment that's going to cause your business damage. We're just there to show you that we got there, how we got there, and then show you the steps you need to take to fix it, essentially.
No surprises for who used that nomenclature of tiger with no claws or teeth. I'm pretty sure I can guess who that was.
Yeah.
And that brings me on to another point. So the last time I actually met that gentleman, he spoke about something that I think he called the if this then that protocol, which is probably not an actual technical term, but
probably not.
We were having a discussion about breach and attack simulators and why when they actually start to function, yes, they give a simulation, but they'll stop at a certain point. And Pentera, if it's my understanding that it will continue to move laterally until it can go nowhere. Is that correct?
Indeed, yeah, and that's how the report works back, basically, from an exploitability point of view, right? Hackers don't get to somewhere and think, oh, I've not managed to do anything, and that's where the terminology, and like you said, it's not a technical term, but if this, then that sort of thing. It's very much how an attacker moves through your environment, right? They don't look at it as a single source of trying to get to somewhere. They'll look to piece things together, as it sort of reflects back to what I was saying about the vulnerability scan, really, that you might have things that are way down in the depths and the weeds, the 1.2s, the 3.7s and the 4.9s, and everything that a security team doesn't generally get down to handling, right? They're concentrating on what they believe is their critical risk, 10s, 9s, the 8s. By the time they've got through them, they've probably got another vulnerability scan, they've got more 10s and 9s and 8s, and they're going around patching stuff and thinking they're doing a good job, essentially. But an attacker doesn't move like that through your network. An attacker will use smaller parts to make little gains and little progress around your business. So it's the if this, then that. Yeah, some, as you say, simulation, breach and attack simulation vendors will get to a certain point. What Pentera does is we go right to the point that we'll find something, and if we don't find something, we'll tell you what we did find, and if it is going to potentially cause you a risk, then we'll show you the things that you need to do to stop that from getting any further at any point in the future.
Cool, and I know you mentioned you've had a lot of experience with different POVs, or POCs as some people call it. What does that kind of look like from the Pentera side? I know you kind of aptly call it a one-day challenge, so can you tell us a little bit more about what that kind of process looks like when someone goes, okay, well, this sounds interesting to us, let's see how it works and see what it does, basically.
So yeah, like you said, it's the POV in Pentera world is called the one-day challenge. It's a naming convention that was come up with by said person we mentioned before, but I think it's valid, right? It's not a challenge to us. The team at Pentera love doing them. It's not a challenge to the end customer. It's not a challenge to you as the partner. It's a challenge to the competitors, really, to say that we know we can achieve value in a single day, so hence the name One Day Challenge. But the challenge is to the competition that we would have been in and out and shown value in a customer in the same time that it would have taken them to get approval to deploy agents to endpoints, because we all know that security teams or IT teams in general don't really like installing another agent on an endpoint. So that, first and foremost, is the naming convention. But with Pentera, the automation and everything we've mentioned before, that gives you the speed, the scale, the accuracy, the consistency, the reliability of information that we're getting, we can start to prove value very, very quickly. So the one-day challenge fits in with all of that as a mentality. It's something that we do often. It's something that's really powerful because people can see what it looks like and how it works in their own unique production environment, because we are in production. All of your defensive cybersecurity controls are in production, so why wouldn't you put us in there alongside them to test them, essentially? And what that day generally looks like is we'll obviously do a pre-scoping call with you guys as the partner and the end user, and we'll agree, how many endpoints we're going to test and what they want to get from the day, some sort of success criteria from the day. But the day will generally be along the lines of a black box test, which is a drive-by shooting. We don't know anything about you as a business test and see where we get to from that. We'll do a grey box test, which is more fine-tuned. We'll get a user's credentials, so we'll get their username and password to the system and see where we can get to with that from a privileged access and see if we can start to break some stuff down from that. We'll do an Active Directory password assessment where we'll stress test the business's password strength and their password policy structure. That can be quite interesting at times. There's numerous passwords out there that definitely shouldn't be used in an enterprise or corporate environment for sure. And just changing one letter or changing one number and thinking that's okay is generally not these days. And then we'll do one of two, or maybe even both. We'll do a ransomware ready test, which is our ability to drop a completely safe by design ransomware payload into your environment and see how your defensive controls react to that. And then we might do a credentials exposure test, which is our ability to look into the dark web or the deep web or the web in general and look to see what usernames and passwords you've got that are exposed out there on the internet. That's essentially threat intel, right? Loads of companies do that. But what Pentera does is using the automation, using our software, we can plug those credentials into Pentera and start to use them against you at scale. So rather than fishing around and trying to find out if you've got a username and password that's still in use in yourselves as a business, that's out there, leaked onto the internet somewhere, you can actually start to really quickly pinpoint who you need to enforce a password change on, or maybe delete an Active Directory account because that user's no longer with you as a business.
So the one-day challenge, that's a real sort of puff your chest out moment for you and Pentera. Can you sort of go into a little bit more about what that is, why it's so important, and why is it a challenge?
It's as I mentioned right at the start of talking about the one-day challenge, it's not a challenge to us, it's not a challenge to you guys as a partner, it's not a challenge to the end user even, it's to the competition in terms of deploying those agents. They won't have even got that through as a change request in the time we've been in and out and done everything that I've just said about the black box test, the grey box test, the Active Directory password assessment, the ransomware ready thing, the credentials exposure thing. But we generally finish the day up at 3 o'clock-ish, 3 or 4 o'clock. We'll have a results meeting, go through what we found during the day. That gets presented in a really easy to understand, either high level CIO, CISO sort of report that's a couple of pages long and shows them essentially their security posture. And then when you get used to using Pentera, obviously more than just in a one-day challenge, you'll see that increase over time as you're starting to actually plug gaps that matter rather than chasing around plugging a load of stuff that doesn't. But from that, you can get a low-level designed report as well, so you can hand that to people who are actually operating the rest of your defensive security controls and show them what to go and fix. There's a full remediation wiki built into Pentera. And it gives, at the end of the day, I guess, from a POV, it gives the customer, and the partner generally will attend those with us as well, and it gives you a real idea of what we can achieve in a single day, and a bit of a taster of what Pentera is capable of, but also with the lasting impression of imagine having this power to do this to your business, to do this to different areas of your business every single day. So you're not blinded to what the critical risk is within your business. You're taking the attacker's or hacker's perspective on your business seriously on a day-to-day basis, and you can actually start to close down the critical risk, the critical exploitable risks within your business, rather than chasing around patching a load of things. You don't actually know if you're helping your business increase your security posture.
And I guess that becomes even more powerful as you go forwards in terms of, well, in first instance, you're stress testing what you've got and what you've kind of got in place, make sure everything's kind of holistically working together. But then as you start to look at maybe future technologies, you go, okay, we want to look at the EDR side of things. You can then theoretically say, okay, well, let's bring 2 different EDR companies in, let them do their POC, and then have Pentera running and see which one's actually going to perform best for their business as well. So kind of future decisions as well.
Definitely, there's 3 angles to that really, because of the fact that we can use automation to stress test security controls. You can look at controls that you may have had in place for 5 years plus. It may even be longer than that, right? You may have legacy security controls in place that have been passed on from being managed by a security team, and they're just with procurement now who get sort of tasked with go and try and get 5% off that renewal every year. But the reality is no one's brave enough to say, does that still work for us? Do we still use that technology today? Or have we moved on as a business? Have we moved on as a company that we don't actually use that? And we've got what we label as zombie renewals, which is where it gets past procurement and they're just asked to get some money off every year. No one's brave enough to go into the rack in the data center or go online and switch that off, because it might stop someone from working. It might stop someone from having access or VPN access to a server, or it could be a plethora of reasons as to why someone's not brave enough to switch that off. But with Pentera, you can actually stress test everything, so you can see if that's actually in play and you're still using it. You can do that on today's environment. You can do it on what you're using today, so you can stress test that and see if there are misconfigs, or if all of those defensive security controls that you've got in play are actually fit for purpose for you as a business today. But to your point, Matt, is on future investments as well. Like you said, people could be looking at a EDR replacement. They could be looking at NDR. They could be looking at PAM. They could be looking at anything in terms of security as a project. But if you have Pentera in play, you can actually point Pentera at those in their own POVs or POCs, as you say, and really start to make informed decisions on what is right for you as a business, rather than just trusting what's being said by XYZ vendor. I'm not going to name any names. It wouldn't be good for me to do so. But you can actually really start to test them in your own environment as to which ones are right for you as a business, which is a huge amount of power to have as well. On top of that, in terms of making the decision of where you need to invest as well, right? Everything that Pentera does maps back to the MITRE ATT&CK framework and the pillars of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And it may be that you as a business or some of your customers might look at this and think, I need to go ahead with that EDR project. I need to go ahead with that DLP project. I need to go ahead with that PAM project. But it might not be what they actually need to spend money on. If you look at what Pentera can do in terms of mapping back to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, it might be that their EDR is actually doing a really good job, but their DLP is really, really suffering. Is the DLP that they're using today actually fit for purpose for them as a business? Have they moved on from that technology and its value to them as a business? So you can really start to actually look at areas of your business that you need to increase the security on, and do that with a structured and informed approach, rather than just doing what you think needs to be done for you as a business, essentially.
Yeah, so this sounds like a great sort of foundational technology to have in play when you're making these strategic decisions in terms of technology choices, vendors, even your cybersecurity strategy moving forward, as far as policy goes as well. There's a lot that can be covered. I'm thinking back to the credential exposure. Looking out onto the internet, see what credentials have potentially been, gone out to the dark web, and what an attacker would do with that information should they get in. Mm-hmm. So this is all about, once they're in, but what about, the external facing? Because I know there's something that you guys do in that space as well, called Surface. Mm-hmm. So if you could go into a little bit of that, I think the viewers at home would appreciate that as well. Yeah,
no problem at all. So we cover it from a 360 perspective, really, for the full attackers or hackers view as a business. We've got two aspects to what we do in terms of that. We've got the inside out, so assuming a breach, assuming someone's got in, where can they get to, and how quickly can they get there, and what do you need to do to put things in place to stop them?
Because it's not an if, it's a when these days, isn't it?
Very much so, yeah. I think it's a widely used phrase of there's two companies out there, there's companies that know they've been breached and companies that don't know they've been breached yet, sort of thing. So it's, that the Pentera core takes care of that, assuming a breach, assuming an attacker's made a beachhead into you as a business. Where can they get to, and what have you got in play to stop an attacker getting any further, basically. But we've also got from the outside in, that covers the inside out, and then, as you quite rightly said, Ed, we've got Pentera Surface that covers from the outside in. So what do you look like from an attacker's perspective, just from what you advertise on the internet, from what you've got advertised on web-facing IPs, public-facing IPs, on your website, on your domains in general? What have you got out there that looks attractive to a hacker for them to even look at you and think, I'm going to have a go at these guys as a business? So what do you look like from that view as well, right? It's all important. It really is.
Well, I can definitely see that being super valuable, especially, if you liken it to your house, right? Say I was a burglar. I'm not going to go for Fort Knox. Somebody I know that's got all the security defences in place, that it's going to be really difficult. I'm going to go for the open windows, the ones that might not really have a decent might not have a burglar alarm, let's say, so I'm going to avoid those and go for the ones that are just easy pickings.
Yeah, exactly. The door that's left unlocked, the window that's left ajar, the
Key under the mat.
Yeah, exactly. Key under the mat, right? It's the key under a mat. So I guess a good analogy to expose credentials, right? If you've got credentials out there, you have got a key under the mat, essentially. So yeah, it gives you full reign of access to finding the loopholes and the gaps that you've got in your security controls. Can be worked back to a house or a castle, but also to the bit that Matt said earlier about if you've same with a house or a castle, if you've got an issue with your front door that you can't lock it, you're not going to be spending money on fixing the ceiling that hasn't got a leak. If you've got an issue with a window that's slightly open, you're not going to be looking at fixing the plumbing in your house. You're going to be looking at that, right? So that's what Pentera helps you do, is to allocate things that are really important and under stress in businesses at the moment. There's a problem with time. There's not enough hours in the day. There's a problem with resource out there as well. So you need the ability to push your time, your resource, and then budget and money into the right areas of your business that's going to actually help you increase your security posture, not to run around trying to fix things that don't need fixing, essentially.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Ben, really appreciate you joining us today. You've given us a great overview.
No problem at all.
Really simple and easy to understand, and I think something that could be really value for almost any company out there. Thank you guys at home for joining us. We appreciate you listening, and join again for future episodes to hear more about some of the other exciting vendors we're working with.
Thank you for joining us at the Kubus podcast. We hope you enjoyed the chat. Remember, there are more conversations in the series. Just search for Kubus wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe.